69 million, double that number, is still in poverty. So that's important, but I'm not looking at that. I'm looking at those people who have come out. I want to see what has been their journey, what has it been like for them to come out of that whole poverty scenario, and to understand the stories behind it. And I chose the story format for two reasons. One is I like stories, so I like to listen to them. It also tells you, great deep kinds of nuances which happen, which you might miss in a kind of statistical analysis and so on. And secondly, this is an offshoot. I didn't really think of it when I was writing. I just thought they were very interesting stories with humor and irony. These were stories told to me with endeavor, how aspirational they are, how much they try, and so on and so forth. At the same time, the other spin-off to this was, and I gave it to a lot of young people to read, my daughter and her friends, even as I was writing it, and they tell me what you think about it. And they responded very positively. That gave me a lot of hope. The reason is, here was a younger generation who cannot be bothered, with too much of, they're on the go, they're making this nation, they're working very hard. So they must have something which they can understand easily and which they can relate to. So this kind of positive reaction I got, I was very encouraged by that. And I felt that, if people are not wanting to, hear very hard treatises on economics and so on, and to read these big reports from the Planning Commission or whatever you have, then at least if you look at this, there is a story that's happening there which we need to know. And I think that is one of the reasons that motivated me. And the other reasons will come out, I'm sure, in the form of discussion. I don't want to monopolize this discussion just with my thoughts and views on that. So I felt that story needed to be told. And I felt that those nuances needed to be known. Otherwise, we will be isolating ourselves from the majority of what this country is about. So that is what motivated me. So, will you be taking ahead, or I should?
I think why don't you take it ahead?
So I would okay, fine. Sorry.
So I would personally like to congratulate you on a very well written book. And what struck me immediately was, my introduction to you was through the book, and the first thing that I thought was, what a compassionate author. Poverty, through the lens of those who are privileged, through the lens of those who are intellectuals, can often be a very, very patronizing story. And, the intellectualism, the data, the research can be very intimidating. And I think Dr. Mitra's book is extremely compassionate, extremely simple, and, I will just read out some excerpts which I think will tell you, for those of you who haven't read the book, just how simple she has made it for those who don't really have an interest in poverty. I mean, most of us are scared to discuss poverty. We are scared to read about poverty because we see absolutely disturbing poverty around us at various levels. And some of us deal with it in some ways. Some of us, I think we do turn our faces as best as we can. I've dealt with poverty in one aspect as a journalist. But I know that if I go through individual stories the way Dr. Mitra has done, I may just break down and never be able to, write a book, which she has been able to do. So, simplistically, I just underlined points from the book, and then I put it down, on a sheet like this. And if I read out these points, it will tell you, the childlike simplicity with which she has written it. And it's not easy for someone as well-read as her, and someone who has worked so extensively in this field. I think that would have been your biggest challenge, to put it down as simply as you have managed to. So basically the story of the book is, releasing a massive, the context, releasing a massive 137.8 million from poverty between 2004-05 and 2011-12. and dropping poverty ratios in the population dramatically from 37.2% to 21.9%. This is, the basic statistic that has been used to introduce the book. And Dr. Mitra has said that what does it mean to move out of poverty? That's one question. What does it mean to move out of poverty? All those stories are basically about those stories from struggle and despair to hope. When you're, crossing that little line towards well-being, maybe a secure home, a permanent job, things like that. And she asks, what does it tell us about the bridges, roadblocks, and roundabouts in that journey? She also questions, she points out that the expanding circle of growth is still to reach the fringes, allowing for a seamless entry of the poor. It is a drive to secure the pledges of quality health, quality education, quality governance, and opportunities. This effort is not just to get past income poverty, but also to get past the other attendant poverty incapacities that follow and diminish life. She also acknowledges that anything as massive as poverty cannot at once be considered in all its dimensions. So, this is the simple framework with which the book has been conceptualized and written. So, kudos for that. And then what follows are examples of individuals, men and women, and how they struggle to escape from the hardships in their lives. My question would be, again, that as a journalist, we are often accused of always writing about the negatives. We are accused of flagging what has not happened, much more than flagging what has happened. This is a challenge and this is a criticism that I have faced in my entire 20 years. I have chosen to do to actually be on the other side of the spectrum from Dr. Mitra. I have not written so much about the success stories because there are enough people to advertise. The government advertises themselves night and day. The corporate sector advertises themselves night and day. Everybody is on a freewheeling PR exercise to tell us how great they are and what they have accomplished. But if you are disturbed by what is not, and there is a lot of that in India, then you would focus constantly on what more can we do. There is this marvelous film called Schindler's List. And for those of you who've seen it, in the end, when the Allied forces come and they're there to arrest this German man who's been protecting all the Jewish prisoners and making sure that his the factory that he runs, which is supposed to produce ammunition, never produces anything that will work in a war. And he protects all the Jews. He buys them from other places, from concentration camps, and he employs them in his factory, and he's very good to them. So when the situation comes when he's a prisoner, the Jews are free. The Jews collect, and one of them breaks his tooth. It's a gold tooth, and they make a ring and they give it to him as a gesture of their appreciation. And he breaks down, and he says, "I could have saved one more life if only you had given this to me before." So, these are very touching moments for those who really care. And there is so much to be done always. There is so much, for instance, my work in corruption. I've constantly highlighted corruption and the figures have been astronomical. 1.76 lakh crore in 2G, they used to laugh at it, but the 2G auctions have realized more than 2 lakh crore already since 2007 when I started fighting for transparent auctions. The Colgate scam, the CAG was humiliated for his 1.86 lakh crore figure. None of us, I can't even count, I can't imagine that kind of money. But that's the kind of money that builds schools, hospitals, and gives opportunities to those who are disenfranchised. So my biggest question would be that this compassionate voice where you've talked about those who are willing, earnest, people who work hard, all the protagonists in your book are those who are hardworking, who think ahead, who are pleasant, who earn equity. The fact that they're always willing to work, always willing to go that extra mile for others. So how did you choose to write about only those people, leaving out many others who just fall apart, who fall into drugs, who fall into crime, who fall into all sorts. The ugliness of poverty, is scary. And that is perhaps a story that for most might be more compelling to tell. So when we talk about 137.8 million who have been released from poverty, and then you contrast it with the other figure, the world has 872.3 million people below the poverty line, of which 179.6 million people live in India. In other words, India, despite the pro-liberalization and high growth rate phenomena that we've witnessed, has 17.5% of the total world's population and 20.6% share of the world's poorest. This was a 2011 statistic. So over to you.
Thank you, Shalini, for that question. It's a very challenging one, and I have been asked that several times. And let me just say that writing positive stories about poverty is going to get me more flack than writing negative stories about poverty. So everybody is, should and is always talking about the horrible condition of poverty. So I think one thing over there is it was not easy for me to go and look at the positive stories. But the reason I took that on is because there were not that many people doing that part of the deal. Just because the government says that poverty is reducing, I'm not a spokesperson for government. So that is not my intention of doing it. And if you really read these stories carefully, and I know that you have done so, because in our conversations, my conversation with you, I see you as a very sincere person. You have to have done all those exposés that you did, and so on. You're very sincere in your but as you read those stories, you will see that these are stories of hope, but they're also stories of horror. And I think that is what I wanted to bring to the table. I am saying that yes, you have reduced, you've done all these wonderful things with growth, but the throughput effect of that growth is not easy for a person to get out of it. So if there's a street vendor who is trying to make his living, if he's constantly harassed by the police, if he's constantly harassed by goons, after all, the Arab Spring happened because there was one guy, Mohammed Bouaziz, who was being harassed with corruption. So this is the story of hope, but it's also a story of horror. And I think that that is why I wanted to write it also, to see how circuitous that whole process is before they can go forward. What is it like to be an entrepreneur on the cusp of poverty? We keep talking about the rules of business. What is the rules of business for that entrepreneur at the cusp of poverty? I ask you that question. Is there transparency of rules? Is there security in the way he can conduct his business? Is there access to credit? Those are the issues which come up. So I would say that please, when you read this, look for the horror parts as well, not just the hope parts, which is definitely, my injection is, we can't go down on the growth process, but the growth process has to be in such a way that we engage these people. They are contributing 40% of our GDP, more than any corporate combined group, and they employ 90% of our people. Why should we not listen to their stories and their problems and their successes? So this is my answer to Shalini's very interesting question.